little by little, our values can be shifted depending upon what we're called to do. The change is so imperceptible that you can wake up 10 years later doing things that you never would have dreamed of doing.
Morning, Tom.
Hey, Simon. How are you?
How are you?
Doing good.
Good. Day 24, I think, of our morning practice show.
Is it? Wow.
I think that's right. Day 24. And I know we're gonna have Jeff Grant on with us in a few minutes, so we'll talk about him. But I feel like this has been a work in progress from the beginning. We've sort of been experimenting all along, and I know next week we want to try to make another twist in our experimentation process. Should we talk a little more about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thing, right? Because there's the practice part of what we've been doing, and then there's, let's call it the interview part. They don't exactly just pull apart, but they intertwine a little bit. But I think the idea next week is actually do a part where it's an extended practice, where it's really about a practice. And then attached on the other side of that is the conversation and the interview that sort of relates to that, and try it in a new way. I mean, I know, here's how I think about it is there are those things I do in my room when I wake up.
Yeah.
If I'm going to go for a run, that's somewhere else. If I'm going to go do service, that's somewhere else. Like, there's a variety of things. And the idea is, like, might we create something where a group of us can be doing those first things that we do together? So.
Right. Yeah, I think you've had the spirit I've loved about how we've gone about this since we jumped into it 3+ weeks ago was like, it's a work in progress, right? This is not a final produced, perfectly executed show. You actually keep saying, well, maybe it's not even really a show. Maybe that's the wrong word. But I think what we got to was that there is doing a practice, which you and I both do, and we enjoy doing together. And then there's reflecting on practice. And so far the show has been some combo of both, right? And that we think that's made it harder in some ways to participate in either following the conversation or doing the practice. And so splitting them out lets us try to give people a chance to do a practice like we do it, and to be part of and follow along with an interesting conversation with interesting guests about the practice, right?
Well, and I think, you and I may judge them interesting. I hope others do too. But the fact is, at a minimum, they're unique. At a minimum, those conversations are unique, and they're unique because they're accompanying something you don't usually do, which is have a conversation around your morning practice. So we hope to maintain that, and then learn from other people. What are the practices they do? How might we try some of those in the future? What works for them? What doesn't work for them? And just open conversation about the results, et cetera. So anyway, Monday we'll have a new thing, which is, what is today? Today's Tuesday. So in just under a week, we'll have something new.
Cool.
Jeff Grant.
Yeah. So tell me about him. I've emailed with him a little because you helped connect us, but I think you know him pretty well.
I've known Jeff a long time, and I do know Jeff really well. I mean, I know, and I don't think he'll care that I say this, but Jeff had a practice that was effectively walking across the country, but around a track, which I think he could speak to. And I know that, he and I both have practices that sort of stretch throughout our days. To what extent he thinks about those things as morning things or not, frankly, I'm not exactly sure. But anyway, he's a guy who's he's had a variety of, he's got his law degree, but he also is an ordained minister. Went to a Union Theological Seminary, which is part of Columbia University. And he's done a lot of work in the white collar crime world and in a variety of other areas. Interesting guy. So
cool.
Ready to roll?
Yeah, let's bring him on.
Bring it on, Jeff. Hey.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Simon.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Good. It's good to see you both.
Good to see you too.
You as well. Well, welcome to a morning practice. We're happy to have you on.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been watching you guys every morning, so it's been a gift for me. So thank you.
What do you think of it?
Cool.
I think it's great. I think the focus on that kind of mindfulness of what we're doing and how we get our day and our life started is important. And some people probably have not focused on that so much, and now we have the time to do it. and why not start the day off right? So that's great.
Cool. Well, let's start our day off right. Let's just go around and say something we're feeling grateful for this morning. We'll start with you, Jeff.
Well, the obvious would be that I'm grateful to be here. But in truth, I'm sure we're going to get into a little bit of my story, but I'm on prison time. I spent almost 14 months in a federal prison. And there's a certain kind of institutionalization that I've had in my life ever since. And this is that kind of monastic kind of quiet moment that I get to focus on myself. And I'm so grateful for that. And to be of service to other people with the things I've learned, because in truth, I've been socially distanced by society for a long time, and as of all the people who I work with. So what a gift just to kind of be in the moment and experience it from a different place in a different location, and to have now had almost 18 years of sobriety under my belt, to be able to kind of be able to find the richness in it and appreciate that this is all part of my recovery. And it's not punitive. It's not, at least for me, it's not something that's negative. It's a silver lining that I'm able to find in all of this because of the suffering that I've been through. So maybe that's where spiritual growth comes from, and I'm certainly in that, heavily basking in it. I'm just not understand that a lot of people are suffering right now, but I want to be able to add my experience to hopefully help people with their suffering. So that I'm grateful for.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks. How about you, Tom?
I'm going to go with my just clarity today. I turned a corner about a week ago, started eating better, exercising more. I've gotten somewhat comfortable in the unknown because there's just so many of them. There's so many unknowns right now. And normally if I had two of these challenges in my life, I'd feel really anxiety ridden. And now I've got 42 and I don't feel so anxiety ridden. I'm going to go along for the ride. I mean, as Jeff said, in some ways I'm really fortunate that I don't have my own sort of direct disease-based impact with the disease. But even that, it's nice that our curves are flattening. It's nice that things are improving a little bit. It's good to see. So,
thanks. I've got a bunch of things I could say, and I'm staring out at an amazing sunrise, which could just I could even just show you. I don't know if you can see.
Yeah.
Oh, we can see.
So that alone could be enough. But last night, I guess I'm grateful for this awareness that I had last night. I was working and feeling like I've got to finish this project. And my daughter, who's 8, has been watching like Top Chef or the baking show or something. And she decided she wanted to put on a meal for her mom, for my wife. And so she dragged me to the kitchen to make a 7-course dinner. And for the first 10 minutes, I had in my head, I have to be doing something else. I'm going through the motions with her, but I've got to get back to my job.
Yeah.
And I just dropped it. It was your 8-year-old is asking you to prepare a multi-course meal, and she's writing the menu and she's going to be the host. And she says, I'm so stressed. She's preparing a whole meal. And I just thought, this is the thing to be grateful for, is this preparing this dinner with my kids as if we're running a restaurant, and I have to do something else was just I don't know, an illusion, because I didn't really have to do something else. It was time to do that with her. So anyway, grateful for, I guess, the awareness, for the opportunity to do it with her, and the awareness that I could choose to just be in the moment with her. So, all right, Tom, if you'll roll the meditation, we'll sit together for 3 minutes.
We're going to start with a brief sound meditation. So just soften your gaze. You can even look down towards the floor. Notice your breath for a moment, anywhere in your body where it's easy for you to notice it. So that could be at the base of the nostrils. It can be gently moving in your chest. You might even feel the breath moving all the way down into your low belly. Allow your attention to float from sound to sound. And all together, I'm going to invite in a long breath through the nose for 4 counts. So breathing in, 2, 3, 4. Exhale through the mouth. Good. One more like that. Breathing in again, 2, 3, 4. And exhale through the mouth. This time, we're going to exhale with a long extended ah. Just on one tone. So your tone might not match mine. So breathing in nice and full. Thank you so much.
Jeff, do you meditate?
I do. I would say daily. Some of it is a sitting meditation. Some of it is mindfulness kind of meditation. And then, as Tom talked about at the top of the show, I have a walking meditation that I've been doing for about 15 years now. That frankly got me through prison. So it was it's something I've learned that can be a quiet, contemplative time for me. And yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
Did these meditation practices, I don't know your story that well, so you had the practices pre-prison, or they came out of your incarceration experience, or say a little more about that?
I had no meditation, no formal meditation practice before prison. And although I had almost 4 years of sobriety when I went to prison. So that kind of made me different than most people who go to prison, because most people who go to prison with a drug or alcohol problem, they're pretty much doing drugs and alcohol right up to the door of the prison. So when I got there, I was sober, and I was regarding it certainly as part of my recovery. And I was assigned to work in the recreation area, which was a gift, because I spent most of my career hunched over a desk and eating sandwiches on the run and being kind of overweight, and had terrible habits. And I just started walking the track, and I realized that that in pretty short order, that 3 hours a day or so at 3 miles an hour was, it's about 3.5 hours a day. I could put in 10 miles a day, and I would be there roughly a year. So I decided what I would do is vicariously walk from New York to Los Angeles in 10-mile increments, and I would chart my my experience. And various people joined me along the way, and I plotted it out on a road atlas I got in the prison library. So I knew where I was walking from and to. I was walking through Pennsylvania, or I was walking down from Ohio down to Nashville, kind of thing. And it was remarkable, but it required a certain cadence. Like a marathon runner, I couldn't walk too fast. I couldn't walk too slow, because mostly the goal was to just stay in it and not to get hurt, frankly, because I was afraid of having to go to medical in prison. So that just became my practice. And part of the time on my headphones, I would have, say, the local college had NPR, so I was able to get all kinds of arts and news programs and BBC and things like that. But for most of the day, we didn't have that, so I had to truly get into a meditative state, and my posture changed, and my body changed, and my gait changed, and I found myself just having this experience between these beautiful mountain ranges and the most magnificent cloud formations. And there I was in a place with fences and barbed wire and guard dogs, but I was having this truly penetrative experience, and it was beautiful.
Amazing.
When did you get out, Jeff?
I got out in June of 2007, so it'll be 13 years.
Yeah.
I went in the Easter Sunday the year before. So what's today's date? I went in on April 16th of 2006. So this is about the anniversary of 14 years ago going in.
Well, I remember when you and I met, you were newly out. You were just out.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, who's this guy? And I remember you telling that story, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I ran marathons. I've done a lot of those wacky things, long bike trips and things. And I remember when you were telling that story, I could so identify with cadence in particular. Cadence is such a thing, you know? And I also just feel like, you know, applying that to a virtual walk, like that works, you know, that, and you don't have to be in prison to do that, by the way. You could walk around your yard enough times, right, to walk across the country. But on the other hand, of course, it was a great way to, or this is my take. It was a great way to think about that time in a way that is useful. I also remember thinking, you know, you were the first person where I mean, that world is just so unimaginable. You know, I remember because I too went to divinity school, you'd meet these, you know, I always thought of priests as like, you know, there's the animal kingdom and there's the priest kingdom. Like it's their own thing.
Exactly.
And then all of a sudden I knew people who were like, one day they were just like me, and the next day they put on a collar, and I was like, oh my God. And then I thought there were people just like me, and then there's people who go to prison. It's like, no, they're just like us. You know, it's such an interesting thing. And you were one of the first guys that really opened my eyes to that. You know, I've spent a lot of time in prisons in and out over the years since that time, and come to know it as a very different thing. But I do remember very clearly this idea that, because when you and I met, I was in a very difficult time in my life, difficult time in my life. you pretty quickly come to realize that the navigability of a problem, which by the way, more often than not, is just clouded with your own false narrative on the nature of the world and the nature of you in it. Like, it's just so wrong. And if a guy who went to prison can be what you were and are, it was very inspirational to me. So anyway.
Thanks, Tom. I remember I was at dinner somewhere, but the dinner was fine. It was at a restaurant, but the view was terrible. Yeah, it was a parking lot or something. I can't remember. It was just not an attractive view. And I remember describing it, and I said, if you squint enough, you could be in Paris, and you could see the Bateau Mouche coming down the Seine. And it was a joke. But in truth, what happened when I was in prison, it was the same experience, because if you squint enough, this is just optics. This is just a canvas. And I could have been in anywhere. I could have been on a mountaintop, or I could have been in Canyon Ranch. I could have been anywhere. I was doing the things that I needed to do in order to improve. And I didn't have to be, have like kind of a false narrative in front of me of what was good or bad or negative or positive. It just was. And I found beauty in that.
Makes sense.
It's with some trepidation that I say it, because obviously prison and concentration camps are different things. But Viktor Frankl kept popping into my head as you were both talking, and I was thinking about the way he talked about one of the things that distinguished people who survived in concentration camps and those who didn't. And obviously there were a lot of other factors beyond anyone's control, but was how people chose to respond internally to the circumstances. The way I learned his teachings as a kid was that there were still people in concentration camps who would take their last piece of bread and share it with someone else, because the act of defiance, by choosing to still be generous when everything's been stripped away from you, that's how you retain your own humanity. And so I was thinking the squinting so you control the view, right? Or picturing yourself journeying across the country when actually you don't have the freedom to leave the track. Choosing to see it as a time for your own growth. They're all ways of taking ownership, control, responsibility of a system that has taken away many of those freedoms, and in a way you claim them back. So I don't want to assert Viktor Frankl on you, but I'm curious, what do you think?
Well, Viktor Frankl was Man's Search for Meaning was one of my big influences. I read a lot about captivity before I went in, and certainly while I was there and since, because I've done a lot of work around the theology of captivity. In fact, I think I wrote you about it in one of the emails we exchanged. And I just find that it could be as broad as history is written by the victors and by the captives. And we're so intrigued by the story of captives. So I read Mandela. And one of the things we share, for example, is when Tom first got into Yale Divinity School, I sent him a copy of a biography of Bonhoeffer. And
great book, by the way.
Yeah, I think that was Eric Metaxas's book.
Yep.
And the thing is, when you read Bonhoeffer's, Letters and Papers from Prison? I think I may have the title slightly off, but he had gone to Union Theological Seminary, which was my seminary alma mater, and he chose to go back to his certain death in Germany, and he did go back, but he wrote all of these letters, and he wrote them, and later, after his death, they kind of culled a theology out of that, very experiential, very kind of a liberation theology kind of moment out of it. But when you read the letters, as someone who's been in prison, they really look like prison letters. They look like someone who's bouncing off the walls. And doesn't have the feedback of human connection to be able to learn and grow. And even in his letters, he's writing, I don't know if you'll receive this letter. I don't know if I'll hear back from you. Am I making any sense? Which is exactly what I did, because, and it just feels like collectively we're in that moment right now as a society and a culture where we're quarantined and we can't necessarily trust our senses the same way, or we don't have the same tactile sense of experiencing the world. So here we are, and how do we learn to grow and communicate through it? And I just find it such a fascinating moment in the world that I don't know, that I in some way I may be better prepared for than other people. In other ways, it certainly raises up a lot of my historical issues. So it's all there.
You mentioned writing, so I'm going to suggest we write. Let's grab our journals and we'll just write for 2 minutes and then we'll chat. All right, let's finish up our writing and come back. So I know Tom does a very consistent kind of journaling practice, and similar to my question to you, Jeff, about meditation. Did you journal in prison? You did letters, sounds like. Do you still do a daily writing practice of some kind?
In prison, I wrote 3 letters every morning, like clockwork. And I got up early before, I was in a barrack of 180 men. And I got up very early, and it was before the lights would go on. So I would go to the window on the eastern wall, and I would hold the pad and write. But the only light was coming in from the Mercury compound lights that were 40 feet in the air. And so there was a very thin sliver of light before there was a bar. So in order to write, I would have to keep moving my pad back and forth because the shadow of the bars would come in. And so there's another cadence thing that I became so aware of that I remember it 14 years later. And that became part of my habit there. Now it's not letters. It's much more of of a daily chronology, what's going on in my day and how do I feel about it.
Tom, you write letters every day too, don't you?
I do. I carry in here. So I have this pouch, and in here, and as you can see, I'm now out, but all my stamps, you see my stamps in there. I usually have these, which I can't reach them, but my envelopes with the cards in them. And, you know, one of the things about writing a letter is the hard part of writing a letter. The hard part of writing a letter is the stamp, the envelope, and the paper. The rest is easy. It really is. And what I found was once I had a lot of, once I had it all ready, well, it's 10 minutes. It's pretty straightforward. It's very easy. People appreciate it. It's a great way to get your thoughts down. And it's a great way to sort of increase the intimacy of a relationship. So yeah, I do. I've been doing it for, Green Book. It was the movie Green Book. It was like December of 2018. So a year and a half or so ago, where it's like, the guy was writing the letters to his wife. I thought I should do that. And I started. And it extends out of, my journal. I wrote a little bit about Viktor Frankl. I was thinking about Viktor Frankl before you had asked that question, Simon, in part because I read Man's Search for Meaning for the first time. I've read it a few times now, but I read it right after, Jeff, I met you. And it's one of those books, I once met Elie Wiesel, and I've read Night as well a couple of times. I don't remember anything about Night. For whatever reason, I can't say. I remember everything about Man's Search for Meaning. Like there's just some moments in that book that just stay with me so intensely. And I think it's, how a book has that where you just, the moment is so in your soul. I don't know about you guys, but I've read a lot of books. I don't remember much. Like you could tell me, it happened in China and I thought it happened in Russia, like I don't remember, but not with others. And they're few. I mean, I think there's a small list of books where I just really get transported, and I get really transported by Man's Search for Meaning. And I think it's, to me, it's the answer, that notion of meaning and that notion of giving that bread to that person on the day you die. It's just, there's something about that makes so much sense to me, that just feels so, incredibly powerful. And look, I cannot compare, of course, my experience and why I felt so attached to the book at that time. But in many ways, it's kind of like, okay, I felt depths of a kind, and someone whose depths were deeper than mine was really helpful to me. And I think about that book that way. That's what I was writing about. That's why I bring it up.
Yeah, Jeff, what were you writing about?
Yeah, I just let my mind just flow. Because I've watched you two for the last few weeks, the phrase came up for me, the fragility of relevance. And I don't know why I riffed on that, but it just feels like what's become relevant in 5 or 6 weeks, what was relevant is no longer. And now we're in this new moment. And it feels like all what I wrote about is this kind of tenuous stranglehold that thought leaders had on what was important. And I clung to that. So I would listen to podcasts. I'm a podcast listener. And right now it's like, I just don't know that what I was listening to is really that important. And who are my influences now? And or what do I feel is really momental? What's the greatness, the bigness? And it's for me such an interesting question, because I still have the muscle memory of tuning into the things that I was listening to, and I'm finding them a little vacuous, a little not like, this is a crazy sense, but like they're clinging to their place. Like this is someone who millions or hundreds of thousands of people have listened to, and now they need to make a shift, and maybe they're never going to make that shift. Maybe there's a new style or a new servant leadership that has to happen that's different than thought leadership. And since I consider myself a servant leader, that's kind of where I was writing. That's what I was writing about.
I think that notion makes so much sense, and I feel like the wisdom of, I don't want to say names, but not elite thought leaders. Mm-hmm. It always was. It always was. It's just you can see it more clearly now. I mean, I think that's Chris Schumacher is one of the ones that comes to mind for me, mm-hmm. because Chris Schumacher sort of has this post-prison thing going on, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I didn't meet him post-prison. I met him in prison,
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget the light in him.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget it. And that light is in people all around us all the time, all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that light, I don't think comes with necessarily like a good grasp of the language or the ability to write or charisma, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like those things they probably rarely go together. I don't know the numbers,
mm-hmm.
but they certainly don't always go together at a minimum. So I think your point is just it's an interesting point,
I feel like, Tom, we're never going to be able to prove that these conversations end up, whether they're interesting or not, they end up in sync, whether that's because we do this practice together or just because it's a good conversation or because we're compatible people who think about the same thing. I'm so struck, like what Jeff was saying about relevancy and thought leaders. I feel like, Tom, you talk about that a lot. And you've talked about the number of people who missed the financial collapse in 2007, 2008, the number of pundits who missed the Trump election, the number of people who missed this pandemic, and no accountability. Like they're clinging to their place as leading.
Makes no difference.
Like 10 years later, they just keep missing all the things that matter.
Next thing you know, they're doing presidential debates.
Right.
Like what? We put these people?
What gives you the right to ask anyway? Like you keep being wrong. You keep being wrong, but you still have
all the time, all day long.
To comment.
Thank you for bringing this up.
Right.
And here's the thing, though, like they go along with it too, right? Like Biden's going to let these bozos ask him questions on the stage too, same way Barack Obama did, same way Elizabeth Warren would. You don't want to get me going. I don't want to get going, but amen. I totally agree. Like, who are these people? Like, let's have Jeff Grant ask him questions. I'm not kidding. Like, why those guys?
This morning I was on online on a Zoom recovery meeting, and the topic was financial insecurity. And we went around the room virtually, and I had to share on financial insecurity. And I'm in the same boat as most other people. I mean, there's all kinds of things going on, but I searched my feelings and I'm not feeling financially insecure. And the reason why is that the last time that I went through this personally was post 9/11. And post 9/11, I was committing fraud. And now I know that. I'm awake, I'm aware, and I'm not committing fraud. And I'm not getting sucked into this kind of SBA unemployment rabbit hole where everyone's freaking out, and I'm just not going there at all. And I know I'll be taken care of, but there it is. To not have to look over my shoulder and be in fear because I know, because then I was doing the wrong thing. And now I know I'm not doing the wrong thing. I mean, what a blessing that is. So I'm just I've been freed of that. And to me, that feels like just like a normal thing that most people do. Most people aren't looking to commit fraud. Some people wander into it, but if I go to, I don't know, if I call up anybody and I go to church or whatever, I say, hey, listen, have you thought about committing fraud today? Most people aren't even aware of that it's in their, it's a possibility, but I'm aware. And so I feel freed of all of that.
So I got to ask you this, and I think it ties these pieces of our conversation together. So, do people, actively seek out committing fraud or pursuing greed at any cost? And my son was saying to me, he doesn't believe in evil.
Mm.
He's 11. And I said, why don't you believe in evil? And he said, well, the people who do the bad things, they don't think they're doing bad. And I was kind of curious, like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, Donald Trump doesn't think he's doing all the wrong things for our country. He thinks he's doing the right things for his country. I think he's wrong. That's what my son said. But it's not evil because he doesn't think he's doing it to be bad. And so I guess, Jeff, what I've been struggling a little bit, and Tom's heard me ask about this, there are definitely people in the moment of tragedies, 9/11, financial collapse now, who are looking to see how they can make as much as they can, right? I mean, I believe in the aftermath of 9/11, Enron executives were selling their stock. The rest of the world was frozen, and they were selling before it crashed. And we'll find out now that there are plenty of people doing that too. And so is there like stumbling into fraud versus like actively on the whiteboard plotting out where's the new pot of money that our company is going to get? Like, what do you think?
Oh, I definitely think you can stumble into it. And that's mostly because we're not really focused on character. I mean, if I am now, or I'm called to do that now, but I think that little by little our values can be shifted depending upon what we're called to do. So you could be working, for example, in a hedge fund, and like in the movie Wall Street, information is power. So little by little, you start to wander from this naive, nice guy who probably set off with good intentions. And little by little, the change is so imperceptible that you can wake up 10 years later doing things that you never would have dreamed of doing. And some people are aware of the tipping point. And I think deep inside, maybe everyone's afraid of the tipping point. But very few people have the ability to come home in the evening and walk into the bedroom and say to their spouse, look, I'm being called to do things that are just not ethical, or they're just repugnant to me. And instead of going there, we have to sell the house, sell the cars, we have to simplify our lives. And because if we don't, the chances of things going terribly bad is just too large. It's too palpable. It's too there. And the reason they don't do it is, in my experience, is because they're afraid their spouses will leave them. They've spent 10 years being emotionally distant and over-focusing on work. Like you were explaining over those 10 minutes you shared with your child before you came into some form of enlightenment about it. Well, imagine that's going on for 10 years, and then you don't know if your spouse is actually your partner anymore. You haven't been a good partner. So there it is. And a lot of people just can't find themselves on the right side of that. And not everybody gets into trouble, but a lot of them do.
My own impression of that question, Simon, and good or bad, right or wrong, in recovery, you meet a lot of people who either cross the legal line or other lines. They're not that different often. I mean, they exist. I mean, the differences exist. My own observation is incremental is the way. It's It's very common. And what Jeff just described, it's the turning back that's really hard. Like you've stepped over this gray line, then you step over 3 more gray lines, and before you know it, it's actually a black line now. Well, now you got to go back the other way. And it's like, shit, I don't know if I can go back the other way. I think that's very, very common. I always say it's like this, you know, there aren't that many people sitting there plotting evilly. There's just not that many of them. I think that the number of people who actually do those things are very small. I think there's a lot of people who sort of stumble across lines. Look, we've all stumbled across a line. I mean, who amongst us has not stumbled across a line? I think it's just a very common thing. I would also say that doesn't mean, I mean, I see this in recovery all the time. You know, you meet someone, I have people close to me who've dealt with this. Jeff dealt with this, where they cross the line, then once they know they've crossed the line and they've been exposed for crossing the line, they fix themselves. They really do. Well, then they have to go to jail. A year and a half later, when the whole process is done, then they go to jail. Or a year later, their wife or husband leads them. Or a year later, they're fired from their job. And there's this sense of, oh, wait a minute, I'm better. Why do I have to now go pay the price? That price was instrumental very often in getting you better. I hate to say it. And it's the way it works, unfortunately, is that these prices you pay. I mean, I think I paid a price, Jeff, 4 years later. 4 years later. Not a week later, not a year later. And it's such a good question. And it's one of the reasons that I, you know, by the way, Simon, the piece you made on Saturday, I think about the people who are working at the facilities, and I think of the people in the facilities, and man, is it not a black and white issue. These are really complex human issues that are, I think to most of us, we're just blissfully unaware of crime and punishment and humanity and how humanity finds itself in those places.
Right. Yeah. Jeff, we'll have to have you back because I feel like this was just the tip of the iceberg. And
I would love to come back. I'm not only a friend and a fan, but I just think that this is such a great opportunity to grow culturally. And you guys are doing important work here. So I'm grateful for that.
Hey, Simon, before we go, I just want to read a letter I got during the show from my cousin. Hello. I hope you and your family are staying well. I just want to let you know that your morning practice has made a positive impact on your Aunt Barbara. By the way, the subject line is Alzheimer's / your morning practice. It is something she looks forward to every day. Some days she listens multiple times a day. It is the perfect recipe for patients with Alzheimer's, and I'm not sure that's something you recognize. She feels connected, cared for, and informed. She's proud of the work you are doing. I guess I wanted you to know that you're making a difference in places you may not have expected. Love to you all, Pam. Interesting.
That's nice to hear.
Anyway.
All right. Thanks. Good luck with your show, Tom. Thanks so much for being with us, Jeff. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, Simon. Talk to you soon.